Half our session. So what we are going to really talk about started a little over a year ago. So the context for this is around September 2024, the Defense Acquisition Council, the DAC, cleared a proposal for procurement of what it calls future-ready combat vehicles, the FRCVs, which are essentially enhanced main battle tanks. So main battle tanks with superior capabilities, superior mobility, more situational awareness, things like that. And this paper by Amit and Satya actually makes a very compelling case for the contrary, that in fact, India should look beyond main battle tanks. And it's one of those papers where the takeaway is very succinctly and very clearly in its title itself. So that's exactly what we want to talk about today, sort of unpack the relevance, the utility, as well as where our defense budgets should go into. Especially like the paper makes a case that the dynamics of warfare, everything is sort of changing, and maybe the utility for these main battle tanks needs to be reassessed. And of course, we will have a panel discussion sort of thing, whatever it can be here online on a Google Meet, whatever version over this conversation, right? So reports suggest that this is a 57,000 crore project to acquire, produce around 1770 main battle tanks. And this will happen in 3 phases. And the idea is to eventually replace the T-72 series of Russian origin tanks starting 2030. So if this goes through, the RFP, and then, we are in for sort of a longer term lock-in with main battle tanks. And of course, there are political pressures once a project is underway. So this paper actually calls for some kind of a reassessment in advance. So yeah, that's really the context to this conversation. By way of introduction, my name is Shubhankita. I'm a researcher with Takshashila's High-Tech Geopolitics program. And Amit and Satya, who are also on this call, they've really written this paper. Amit is a staff research analyst with the Indo-Pacific Studies program at Takshashila. Satya was previously with Takshashila, but currently is an associate with the Asia Group's South Asia circle here in New Delhi. And Vikrant, who will, sort of add in with his views, differing thoughts on this conversation, is a colonel with the Indian Army and is associated with Takshashila on a short-term basis. He's a research fellow with our Defense Fellowship program. So with that out of the way, I'm going to first ask you, this is sort of a brave stance to take, and honestly, people might even call it provocative and controversial, especially the fact that you laid it out so succinctly in your title, right? I mean, the biggest takeaway of the paper is really just its title. So kudos on getting the title. But also, I don't want this to be misunderstood. So I would like you to set some context, unpack what you really mean when you say India must look beyond main battle tanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Rangita, for that introduction and introducing topic. Very briefly, to answer your question, when Satya and I, in the paper, say India must look beyond main battle tanks, we essentially mean 4 things. Point number 1, that India's land warfare doctrine, it cannot be armored centric going forward. So this is the first takeaway that we have, or we want to, let our readers go away with. The second is, in general, the MBTs in their current form, and even with the upgradations that are being talked about lately in the light of the challenges that have come forward, are not suitable for close quarter combat. So this is point number 2. Point number 3 is that the future fleet of MBTs has to reflect the evolving realities. Currently, we have about 4,500 plus numbers of MBTs that we operate. China has somewhere around 6,000 to 700, and Pakistan has about 2,000. So what we are essentially arguing is that the future fleet has to reflect the current realities or the existing evolving realities. And what we mean by that is there has to be a drastic downsizing of the MBT fleet. The newer investments, the newer investment cycles, uh, they cannot be made in a way to reach replacement levels or expand the current existing fleet. And we think like somewhere around about 1,000 MBTs is what you need, and that too also is to account for the error in our assessment. So I mean, we could be wrong. So I can't be quite arrogant in saying that MBTs will not be useful. So perhaps accounting for that error is what we are arguing for. And lastly, this does not, the assessment, when Satya and I say India must look beyond MBTs, this is not to indicate or have a judgment on the existing fleet that we currently have, or abandon overnight the existing fleet. So this is something that we're talking about 10, 20 years down the line. So these are the four kind of RBF or the disclaimer that I would like to put forward before we get into the discussion.
Understood. So this is not really a judgment on the existing ones, but more so forward-looking for future acquisitions and procurement. Thank you for that. Satya, I want to come to you and ask for some context setting here, right? Because main battle tanks have been here for a while. They probably emerged from the experience of the Second World War, and they're not without their advantages. It's just that the paper claims that going forward, the warfare dynamics are changing. But let's first stop there and kind of set context as to what the advantages, or really, what are MBTs supposed to do, what are they useful for, and what role do they play? And before you answer, there is a poll that I've just started here, sort of an interesting one, I hope, sort of to get the views of the room here, right? Which is, what do you think? Before Amit and Vikrant and Satya even get started with this discussion, what are your preliminary thoughts? Should India look at main battle tanks? So if you can quickly answer that poll, that will be helpful. But that aside, Satya, over to you.
Thanks, Shubhankita, and also Amit set the context beautifully. So just to reiterate what the advantages of MBTs were. So it's pertinent to note that before World War II, tanks as a concept emerged in World War I, but there wasn't really exactly any form factor, any specific role they had in mind, and there was no differentiation with light tank, medium tank, heavy tank, right? No concept of a main battle tank. In World War II, there were medium tanks, there were light tanks, and towards the end of it, I think the German Panzer IV and the Tiger, they actually had full-size main battle tanks that you can quickly recognize as an analog to today's tanks. Now, the reason why this happened is because in warfare, a lot of things became very clear that you need tactically three and a half things from tanks. The first one is being firepower. You need devastating direct fire capability through very high-powered guns. So it's usually 120 to 125 mm shells with various kinds of shells, for penetrating bunkers, concrete, hardened fortifications, and the range and at ranges that can exceed over 2 to 3 kilometers. At the time, it wasn't with very high accuracy, but it could still deliver a large volume of fire. The other thing is protection. So besides the fact that tanks can form a curtain of armor for advancing troops, for infantry, it also allows the crews of the tanks themselves to operate in high threat environments where lighter vehicles like jeeps, etc., cannot survive, and deflect enemy fire, right? Small arms, artillery, shrapnel, and older, I would say, anti-tank missiles and stuff like that. The final thing is, I would say, is mobility. Tracked systems. The reason why tanks are so distinctive, they can maneuver around almost a lot of terrain, wet and dry, regardless, besides the weight, of course. And this means that combined arms formations, where you have tanks, other vehicles, and infantry, can maintain a steady tempo while advancing during offensive operations, or you can also entrench yourselves in very quick to adapt formations when you're defending as well. The final thing, which is why I said 3.5, is also something that Vikrant has alluded to in his rebuttal to our paper as well, which is the psychological impact, right? The physical presence on the battlefield can serve as both inspiration for friendly forces and intimidation for adversaries. There's something called the shock and awe effect. It's still there, it still persists today. The only question is how the three and a half concepts, how much value do they still provide in today's battlefield, where you have like complete transparency over what satellites can see, or where drone swarms exist, etc. And just like a recent military analysis from the US and British, I think, armed forces still maintain that in symmetrical high intensity warfare between peer forces, you'll probably maintain heavy armor as the a spearhead of most operations. But the thing is, those analysis preceded trial by fire, so to speak, in this transparent battlefield era we are seeing post-Ukraine, right? Where the cost exchange dynamics have also fundamentally shifted. And we'll get to that later, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Satya. Amit, I want you to add into what Satya just said, right? Because one interesting term that I found in your paper was about transparent battlefields and how the dynamics are changing. But also, if I can maybe push on the Russia-Ukraine point a little bit, you do talk about how Russia has lost about 3,000 tanks since about February 2022. But at the same time, senior officers in the Indian Army have said that this is more to do with failure on Russian tactical front, which is, they didn't back their tanks with sufficient artillery, infantry, or even connective capabilities. So this is not really a judgment on tanks, but really a judgment on how it was deployed. So how would you respond to that?
See, I think it's a self-serving argument. I mean, come on, those are the Russians, right? They were at the forefronts when it came to fighting with main battle tanks. They were largely very closely involved, right, with main battle tanks fighting, armored fighting, etc. So they were when this all started, right? So it's a self-serving argument that they were not backed by artillery or etc. But the fact is that battlefields have become transparent. And when you ask like what has changed, right? What is the shift that has come about? To answer your question, I think just the odds on the battlefield. To begin with, as you mentioned, battlefield and warfare, they have become transparent. With the advancement in science and technology, they're increasingly transparent. And much of this advancement has come to the fore through Russia-Ukraine war, Azerbaijan and Armenia war, and Israel-Hamas war, right? And as a result of this emergence of transparent battlefield, which Satya was also alluding to, because of the satellites, etc., you can spot these platforms at which are failure at the front line very quickly. So as a result of this emergence of transparent battlefield, close quarter combat has become way too costly, both in human terms and economic terms. And it has given way to beyond visual range warfighting techniques. And this is what the new platforms are looking at. Secondly, in terms of odds, what has changed is, I think, the idea of territorial conquest in the first place. And this is strictly from India's standpoint. This is Russia-Ukraine war is not the right example to draw from when we talk about territorial conquest, because of the huge power asymmetry that the two countries have. Russia's ability to mobilize resources, it's massively it has massive advantage over Ukraine, and plus bear in mind that Ukraine is not a nuclear power. So terms of engagement could have been very different if Ukraine was a nuclear power. So the second thing that has changed is the odds of territorial conquest. And this sense here, what I'm referring to from India's standpoint is with respect to Pakistan and China. And very quickly, the third point is the odds of fielding an extremely expensive but vulnerable platform in the front line of the battlefield. So today, no matter what platform you field in the front lines of the battlefield, they are all equally vulnerable. So the question and the asymmetric capabilities that now the countries and opposing your adversaries have, the ability to take out these platforms has become extremely inexpensive. So the argument or the question here is, does it make sense to field a very extremely expensive platform in the front lines of the battle? And the answer to that could be adding just new ways of protecting, or new armor, new protection systems to justify the continued relevance of MBTs cannot be the way forward. Of course, we can talk about these in detail as the conversation gets forward. But yeah, would love to hear what Vikrant says.
Yes, Vikrant. Yes, I was going to come to you.
Thanks, Shubhankita. Thanks for the introduction, and it's an interesting paper. My compliments to Satya and Amit on that, and really thought-provoking. It really got me thinking with time. So my take on this is that MBT by itself was never meant to be, a force onto itself in isolation. MBTs have always been effective in a combined arms kind of a setting where there are vulnerabilities that an MBT has. It has limitations like obstacle crossing. It has limitations to air, vulnerability to air aircrafts and all that. So the combined arms, the way the groupings are done, cater for these vulnerabilities. They try to compensate for them, like the number of suppose a thrust line is planned, so you plan on the number of crossings, so you group engineer resources accordingly with them. You group air defense along with these. So the vulnerability stack, which is now being professed as having increased because of loiter terminations or because of battlefield transparency. So if you're thinking, I mean, if we base the argument on the fact that the battlefield has become transparent, it also means the same BFT is being enjoyed by the armor formations or the tanks themselves. So if the adversary is able to look deep into your thing, detect your armor concentrations, so the armor formations are also aware of it. They are also looking deep while planning their operations, and accordingly they are also looking at passive measures to protect themselves, and better dispersion, more different types of camouflage, also grouping electronic warfare means, counter UAS means. So the combat groupings itself, I feel, would evolve. So it, instead of tank becoming irrelevant, it would continue to adapt to the battlefield, which is it has done since its inception. So it has been, so the groupings, so certain things will evolve on the platform itself. So that will be with optimizing the balance between firepower, protection, and mobility. So that optimizations will lead to certain design improvements, which will address some of the vulnerabilities, and some of the vulnerabilities would be addressed by how the combat groupings itself are formed, wherein you'll have more probably electronic warfare resources now being allotted with mech forces. You would have drones forming part of the recce troops themselves, which were primarily earlier based on just battlefield surveillance radars and all that. So the whole battlefield transparency thing, I think it will be neutral. It will be equally applicable to both the sides and all arms included. So I feel the advantages that a main battle tank brings of mobility, flexibility, the ability to be able to create a sphere of a zone of influence around it, where an armor formation kind of positions itself. So those advantages will continue to remain, and just details of, say, vulnerability to attrition can't be a reason to give up on a potent platform which delivers on battlefield results and effects. That's my take to begin with.
Thank you, Vikrant.
So is it okay to respond now, just in a very quick thing, or is it going to be disruptive to the flow?
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
I'm okay with it, but yeah.
Yes, please go on.
Just very quickly, I agree with Vikrant's point, and I would say the adaptation and the trade-off between mobility, firepower, and protection is already happening, which is why light tanks exist, which is why other options such as the Striker IFV, the infantry fighting vehicle, and its multiple variants, as well as, let's say, the Vajra K9 that India is using, right? So basically long range and quickly mobile precision artillery, for instance, all of those exist. So we are just saying, hey, maybe main battle tanks, the the legacy conception of that needs to be reassessed. You have.
In fact, coming to that, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but I get the point that you're making. But that is what I am also. I mean, essentially, the argument is that if the tank is adapting, so it's not just the platform that will adapt to the new battlefield realities. It is also the your techniques, tactics, your procedures, everything that is around mechanized warfare itself has to adapt to all this. So it is instead of becoming a question whether it will become irrelevant. My take is that it will adapt, and the battlefield will ensure that it adapts, because battlefield is very neutral in this sense. It doesn't have biases of legacy or anything of that kind. It basically forces you to adapt. Either you survive by adapting, or you perish. So that is essentially which will drive this whole the MBT argument itself.
All right.
Like K9 Vajra, you say we are mixing up self-propelled artillery for main battle tanks. So they have logistic issues of their own. How much? So there are. So it is hinging your battle doctrines or military doctrines around platforms or individual arm capabilities would be a flawed way to look at it. You need to look at what are your objectives that you want to achieve, and then how do you orchestrate all of your combat power by mixing and matching it to be able to do it in an acceptable time frame and with an acceptable level of attrition.
Thank you. I think one thing we all here agree is that the battlefield is changing. So going back to that, I think. Satya, I want to ask you to chime in with, as this battlefield changes, what really are the threats that an MBT would need to counter, right? And then probably assess how it ranks when faced with these measures. So maybe, just start with, we agree that the battlefield is changing. There are, loitering munitions, there are drones, there are anti-tank missile weapons, all these things, precision-guided missiles. How is it changing specifically? What are our learnings from other wars? And specifically, how do MBTs rank against those?
Right. I would say at this point, Vikrant and both of us are, Amit and I are pretty much, I think, agreeing to agree kind of situation here. It's just the terminology is changing. But yeah, coming back to the threats that, fundamentally have altered the survivability calculus, I think that the effect of, let me start with the effect that this has had, is that instead of relying on passive protection, which is armor mostly, or early detection, etc., the focus has shifted to being very mobile, to be able to defeat the tracking of those anti-tank weapons so much as, and not focusing on deflecting the attacks, right? And on top of that, you have active protection systems that are meant to address this threats, right? But the more and more active protection systems you keep adding to a tank, you keep defeating the mobility side of things for a tank. You're going to make it heavier. You're going to make it more economically, problematic to sustain that kind of, addition. And you'll require like extensive power and cooling infrastructure. And considering state capacity on how to make these things remains, somewhat stunted, for lack of a better word. You will have to think about this constantly. Now, this focusing on the threats themselves, which are like, you mentioned like top attack munitions and loitering munitions. Conceptually, they've been there since the 80s. In fact, the Javelin, the Spike, I think they were the culmination of that. Basically, because the frontal armor is the strongest part of the armor of a tank, you try to target the top part, which is the entry hatch and where the driver is most vulnerable, right? So you basically use a radio, IR or laser guided system to basically, shoot a missile into the air, which then goes into the air and then targets the top of the tank. Loitering munition, as you mentioned, and we have seen this constantly in Ukraine, and the US has been using it for war crimes for a long time. They basically can precisely target vulnerable tank components, which is the moment you know where the optics are, where the ammunition storage is, you can do that. And this you could say that maybe the targeting capability of the systems are maybe still not where they are, but they're only going to become better, right? Like it's, I think that's a foregone conclusion at this point. Like algorithmic warfare is going to become better. And then finally, you have like, long-range precision artillery, of course. And then you have first-person view drone swarms and just like drone operators. And the thing is, the usual counterpoint to like drone swarms is, hey, the moment you turn off GPS guidance in a battlefield, or just cut off data link, something like that, they're going to be clueless. But this is where the AI, for lack of a better word, is making sure that in GPS denied and in internet denied environments, these drone swarms can still identify and figure out how to attack particular targets, which MBTs will be one of them. Right. So I'll stop there, because transparent battlefield in and of itself is also a threat conceptually, because you have persistent visuals of everything. But that's a larger point.
Yeah, Vikrant, I see that your hand was up.
Yeah, so that is what I'm what I feel. If you're basing this argument on a line that all this is getting fielded against the MBT, and that the side which is fielding the MBT is not going to have all this, that is where the flaw is. I mean, if India is going in for MBTs, it is not that India is going to stop, is going to turn a blind eye to lighter munitions, or it's not going to build other capabilities. So it is optimizing your combat capability, and that is where I feel the MBT still fits the bill, because it has the ability, I mean, the flexibility that it gives to commanders to project combat power with speed in in over swaths of territory, and then be able to kind of have a latent dominance over geography for a limited period, and then even move to other geographies. And so that flexibility is what you can't retain by doing away with this. And the argument between, say, ICVs, MBTs, and in what numbers those combinations will match, that itself will be a threat-driven kind of composition, where in your entire from your place where you are launching to where you're headed, the entire threat matrix will tell you what exact composition of this command arms teaming is supposed to be, and it will be catered for in that sense. So because loitering ammunition is there, or AI-enabled systems are there, it is not going to take away anything from the main battle tank. It will only enhance the main battle tank's capabilities itself. The mechanized formations will be better networked. Their ability to operate more dispersed. Their battlefield situational awareness would be much better. So all that is going to complement the advantages which the main battle tank already has. So it would enhance, it would in fact allow lesser numbers to achieve better dividends, and it would also kind of give you probably optimize the effects that the tanks themselves have.
Thank you, Vikrant. I think, like Amit was saying, we are closing the poll as of now. Looks like some people agree, some people don't. But really, the point was to read the room, not so much hold you to it, because as you might have seen, the responses are anonymous. So I'm ending the poll for now. And Amit, I want to come to you. I think so far we've spoken about MBTs in theory, right? I mean, but really what might be more useful is to situate it in the context that India faces. And you alluded to this by saying the Russia-Ukraine dynamic and scenario is not one that's applicable to India, because both India, Pakistan, and actually India, China, right? All three are nuclear powers. And there is a lack of a power differential here to the extent that we see between Russia and Ukraine. And of course, the nuclear umbrella and multiple other factors, difficult terrain, all of that means that we have to assess this situation differently. So I have actually two questions for you. One is, where does main battle tank, this platform, really fit into India's doctrine? And secondly, if you were to evaluate the terrains at the land front that India faces, the deserts in Rajasthan, the Himalayan passes, and then also the LAC and the LOC, which are mountainous and difficult terrains, high altitude, how does this platform really rank? So 2 questions, first on the doctrine and secondly on the terrain. Over to you, please.
Yeah, before I get to those 2 questions, just quick rebuttal to Vikrant's point. So I agree with the fact that the point that he made, attrition cannot be used as a way to demolish the complete fleet of MBTs. But the problem here is that there has to be a threshold beyond which you have to start the reassessment. Attrition in warfare is it's a given, right? But you have to start the reassessment at some level, and there has to be a threshold. Second, on adaptability, I again agree completely with his point that the changing characteristics of the battlefield will allow for that adaptation to happen. My only worry and fear here is that there's a political economy of MBTs, and that political economy and the vested interests, right? That will not allow for that adaptation to happen. And I'm not saying adaptation is not happening. As Satya was saying, there are adaptations happening, but this need to cling on to MBTs because they have defined land warfare capabilities in the past. That is something that we need to reassess. Okay. Now, coming on to the question about how do the MBTs fit into India's doctrine. Now, India, the last document, whatever we have available, right, from the Indian government or the Indian Army, from 2018 land warfare doctrine that envisions, if you look at that, it has strategies for very brief and strategies for both western and northern borders. On the western front, that is towards Pakistan, it says that they envision swift application of force and will destroy the center of gravity and to secure spatial gains. This is what they say with respect to the western front. With respect to the northern front, the doctrine emphasizes deterrence, force-centric operations, mobilization, etc. But and I think they do not. I mean, the fact that they did not mention spatial gains on the northern front is something which I think it tells me that this is an acknowledgement of the fact that territorial conquests are not something that we'll see in future, especially with respect to the Chinese. Now, some questions that need to be asked here are conventional, and this is again the point that Vikrant was making, right, with respect to MBTs. I completely agree, but the only flaw in the argument is that those points are applicable to the general application of MBTs. Now, this paper especially talks from India's standpoint of view, from whether MBTs are relevant from India's standpoint. And in that sense, I would say we need to ask ourselves a question that are conventional wars plausible with China and Pakistan? I mean, of course, we can go into whether India is trying to create a carver space for conventional warfare, but there's a debate on how wide that space have we been able to carve, right? And then if yes, and if conventional wars are plausible, is imposing punitive incursions realistic, again, against Pakistan or China? And what were the political objectives, if any, of those territorial captures? And if leverage is the answer, that are the MBTs right tool to achieve it? And to answer that question, I would just very briefly on whether conventional warfares are plausible in this setup. I would say that existence of nuclear deterrence and the lack of sufficient power differential when it comes to conventional land warfare capabilities vis-a-vis China and Pakistan. I'm not saying overall comprehensive power differential. We might have comprehensive power differential of quite significant conventional superiority when it comes to India and Pakistan. But I'm talking purely in the sense of conventional land warfare capabilities. So I don't think that these two factors allow for an old-fashioned, large-scale territorial warfare to impose punitive incursions. And then, some may also argue, and this is something that people who argue in favor of MBTs, they make this argument that MBTs could be useful in defensive positions. But this claim has certain limitations. One, that if any, MBTs advantages lie in offensives if you have to use them. You can use, of three things or the characteristics that that they provide you in a battlefield: mobility, firepower, and protection. Mobility is not very useful when you are taking defense, when you're making defense, right? Only thing that might be useful here in defense with the MBTs taking a defensive position is their firepower. In defensive position, you can rely on a lot of things. You can rely on terrain. You can rely on you already have small arms and heavy arms, and then you have the support of artillery. So really, the argument with that the MBTs could be used in defensive position is a stretch. If anything, I'm willing to concede the only advantage that they might have, again, with I would put a condition there, they might have is in their offensive capabilities. Now, again, with Pakistan, they enjoy. Pakistan also enjoys. You might enjoy conventional superiority, but then again, when it comes to making armored thrust and imposing punitive incursions, you see how in the last few decades things have evolved, and the space for conventional warfare is very limited. Now, to your question of terrain, again, very briefly, I'll address this question. Terrain and geography, I think, are very critical determinants. If you look at, especially when you look at land warfare capabilities, they are a very important determinant. And for India, it matters because the features that India is surrounded by are at places marshy, then sandy. At some places it's plain, but mostly again in the towards Yellow Sea and LAC, you have mountainous terrains, right? Now, the predominantly mountainous and forested terrains, now these limit the maneuverability of the MBTs and the effectiveness. The high altitude region, and they have been amongst the world's, and India, if you look at India, Pakistan, India, China, the border is one of the world's highest battlefields, right? And that poses serious operational risks to the effectiveness of MBTs. And this is something that the Army has been telling DRDOs, and there have been problems in the past. They have failed their trials, and therefore there was a need, the need was felt for lighter tanks in these areas. Now, again, in mountainous regions, you can employ guerrilla tactics from concealed positions, and they could be very effective in taking out MBTs. And the meandering roads in mountainous regions do not quite make for a good feature for MBTs. They were designed for plain warfare, right? If at all, you can stretch it to marshy land and sandy terrains, but not mountainous. Again, marshy and swampy zones, I would like to give an example. Give the example of the 1965 Battle of Asaluttar. And this was instructive because you had, and this was, I think, the second biggest armored warfare after the World War II, if I'm not wrong. And here, the Indians were outnumbered by the Pakistani armored division. And what they essentially did was that they flooded the plains. Very briefly, if I have to tell you, they flooded the plains, and what it essentially meant was that the Pakistani tanks got bogged down and they could not operate. They would then take it out very effectively by the Indian armed forces. Like they made an axis and they took them out very easily. Then again, when it comes to sandy terrain, I think the Battle of Longewala from 1971 is instructive, where there's a possibility in sandy terrain that one, you have operational issues because of how sand can impact your engine, etc., and the extreme heat that you are subjected to operate. And then Pakistani tanks got immobilized, and therefore this whole idea of lighter tanks had come into being and the adaptation. But the sad reality is that we haven't adapted to these realities. And in fact, in light of recent challenges, before this whole challenge from Russia-Ukraine warfare and war, and Azerbaijan and Armenian war came to the fore, we were actually transitioning towards lighter tanks. But now that the vulnerabilities of the tanks have been exposed, we are going back to adding protection, etc., which will make tanks more heavier, costly, and costly platforms at the front line of the battlefield. So this is what my take is.
Vikrant?
Yeah, so I think you've covered quite a bit of issues here, but I still would like to argue that there's there's some issues with respect to the understanding of mech warfare, the way it is carried out, that exist in the argument. First is this whole thing about whether deep incursions are possible or not. So firstly, the depth of an incursion by itself is not a end to be achieved. It is in respect to some value objective that you intend to address, and by doing so, you intend to draw some reaction from the enemy, which kind of dislocates him, then brings him into. So that's the whole part of maneuver, is to get into a position of advantage with speed, with adequate firepower intact, and so that when the enemy is reacting, he's reacting from a position of disadvantage, and then you're causing attrition. So your military objectives could be territorial gains, or it could be, just destruction of combat potential in itself is a military objective, because it weighs upon the opposite side's mind. It gets you leverage in your towards your political objectives. So that is one bit. So it's not necessary that you have to go hundreds of miles into the adversary's territory to kind of dislocate him in that sense. And second thing is about this argument about if we believe that because deep incursions haven't happened, and asymmetric warfare is kind of changing the battlefield and all that, I feel it is still a success of deterrence itself. The ability to be able to the ability to affect deep incursions gives a kind of deterrence by denial or deterrence by punishment kind of effect in your doctrine. So like the armored division and all, these are assets of strategic relevance. Their mere presence, the threat in being that they create, that itself keeps wars from happening. If you look at the threat itself on both sides, why are adversaries keeping MBTs still with them? The main reserves of the Pakistan are based on MBTs. If you look at the OBAT of Western Theatre Command, the cabs, their composition retains medium and heavy tanks on its OBAT in substantial numbers. And if you look at the terrain itself, there is adequate space for like this disadvantage of meandering roads and all. So putting your mech asset in the TBA, that is part of our logistics. You will not start moving on meandering roads to join battle when these assets will be in location where suitable terrain exists. There are adequate places in Eastern Ladakh, in the central sector, in areas of Sikkim, where you have space for employment of mech forces, and by ceding that space to a platform or to any other alternative which is less potent, you will only give an advantage to the adversary of executing speedy maneuvers against you, and then putting you at a position of disadvantage at the outset, and kind of make you reactive to the emerging situations. So what a force which can maneuver, which has inherent firepower, which can integrate with other arms seamlessly, and which can deliver that kind of violence that is required at the point of decision, will always keep you an advantage. So if like this whole thing about the disadvantage of terrain is going to be neutral to both sides. So it's not, if the terrain is constructed, you will change your tactics, you will evolve the way you will operate in that constructed terrain, but you will still manage. The better side will prevail, because it would have made this use the terrain to its advantage by leveraging its combat potential. A side with without armor and say purely based on infantry or just long range RT fires will not have the effect which you desire at the end of a decisive battle, because you can keep slinging a whole lot of RT shells at the enemy. It has no impact. On the LC, it's been going on for years. So when a conventional war, when you decide to go to a conventional, the argument that are they plausible? Of course. Till few years back, people thought if if the air arm was used, it was war. Nothing like that happened. Air arm got used. So when the escalation ladder, when you start climbing the rungs, the option that you decide to, at that point, you can't start building capability. You need to have these capabilities, which in a way kind of because deterrence itself is dynamic. Deterrence is not absolute. You can't say that, okay, I have a armor division, so I am going to continue to deter someone. You have to reinforce that deterrence by continuously adapting. So your adversary should know, okay, even in this denied EW environment, even in a UAV dominated littoral, even despite that, if you retain the capability of being able to use your combat potential, your maneuver forces, that itself creates deterrence. That will dissuade enemy from getting into thing with you. So this particular advantage is what I'm alluding to. It's because once you take out, just imagine a situation where you take out the battle tank, main battle tank from the equation, and then you want to, okay, what beyond? Okay, you've done enough of artillery shelling and there's just no response. Then what beyond that? And this whole nuclear gambit thing is being, I mean, you're playing into the Pakistani narrative where it feels you think Pakistan would, decide to go nuclear at the very. There are red lines which they have themselves, their authors, Mr. Kitbai and all, they've defined those red lines for themselves. So you need to have potential to tinker those red lines even to reach there. If you don't have the combat potential to do it, then I mean, the deterrence won't work. It will not last. And this whole shift towards asymmetry itself is success of this deterrence, because he wants to unshackle that deterrence bind that you put in. You're ignoring him, ignoring Pakistan continuously. So what does he do? He can't do, like you said, because of the near parities. A conventional thing is it's not an option that they would like to exercise, but that's an option you as India we should retain at all stages, and it brings a lot of value to your military doctrine.
Thank you, Vikrant. Amit, do you have something to respond to that? And also, Joe in the comments says, let's say we do away with MBTs and our adversary decides to keep it and adapt and improve it. What would be our response to it, right? And to this, I want to reference.
I would also like this whole, if we selectively take lessons from events of military history, then we would probably, go wrong in our assessment. Like Asal Uttar, yes, Asal Uttar was a defining tank battle, and but the fact that is, I mean, the destruction of those 97 tanks was brought about by the two armored regiments, apart from Abdul Hamid, RCL-based, light vehicle-based detachment. There were two armored regiments, the Deccan Horse and 3 Cav, which were effectively involved in that battle. So it was not that tanks got stuck in the swamp and the offensive petered out.
Got it. This is getting very interesting.
And same as with even with Longewala, if you if there's faulty application of combat arms or their employment, then obviously you'll get results of that nature. Because Longewala, I mean, if that attacking force should have bypassed that location, there was no business getting after a company-sized thing if you were planning offensive on that thrust line. But they wasted time. They got in to their terrain intelligence was poor on the Pakistani side. They should have planned their routes with good terrain intelligence. So all that is part of that is what TTP is all about. If you have a mechanized formation which faults on these basics, then obviously you'll not get results. But if you are having everything right, then you will get results which are much more disproportionate.
Okay. Yeah. Again, just to reiterate what we started with, the disclaimer at the beginning, and I think most of the people are not here. So I think it would be beneficial for people who have joined late. When we make the argument that India must look beyond MBTs, what we're essentially saying that India's land warfare doctrine cannot be armored centric going forward. One. Second, in its current format, I think in its current form, and even with the upgradation, the technological protection, etc., the MBTs are not suitable for close quarter
I think
combat.
this.
Just let me
Sorry.
complete. Third, the future fleet size of MBTs has to reflect the changing realities, and not saying completely do away with them. And of course, the paper also talks about light tanks, so that also answers Joe's questions. I'm just saying that the fleet has to be drastically reduced. And lastly, this is not an attack on the existing fleet, but this is, we are thinking about 10 to 20 years later. And the argument that Vikrant made, that why the adversary is keeping it, and if the adversaries are keeping it, I mean, that could not be an argument. That could not be a reason to argue that because the adversary is doing it, we should do it too. The advantage of having open space for debate and discussion is to have these kind of discussions, right? So that is what I have to say. Again, the point that I was making with respect to terrain was, I take Vikrant's point that we should not take the wrong lessons. But the lesson I think here is that you can use terrain and make, in those particular terrains, the MBTs became immobile. And yes, in the Battle of Asalutar, it was Indian Armored Division that took out those tanks. But then again, they came and took them out after the Pakistani Armored Division became immobile in those. And they had to play with the terrain first to get to take them out. So that's what my rebuttal would be to.
I'll again like to say the same thing. The terrain is going to be neutral. The terrain takes nobody's side. So the side which is able to use that terrain intelligently, knowing the limitations of their platforms, knowing the strengths of their platforms, that side will prevail in that particular engagement. The plan was pretty audacious during Asalutar. The river line they wanted to reach, had that worked out, it would have been a major debacle on that front. But then they were, yes. So the ability to create. So coming back to the defensive battle part, we are assuming that when defenses, static defenses, when armor is co-opted, it's only using firepower. The flexibility that armor reserves have to be able to effect responses along a wider frontage. You can have a concentrated reserve earmark which can practice and rehearse and be ready for multiple tasks on a frontage. So instead of having a tank distributed all over the frontage, it's not going to be.
The button here. We just have a lot of ground to cover, and I
Okay.
think.
So I think
yeah.
My take is terrain is a neutral factor. Battlefield transparency is a neutral factor. Both sides are going to enjoy it. Terrain is going to impose same restrictions on both sides and give the same advantages to both sides. So you need to have the right platform at the right time in right numbers. That will give you advantages in the outcomes.
Yeah, I think no opinions are being changed at the end of this session. I think we can all agree to disagree. And also maybe to Joe's question, I'd like to reference something that the paper does, which is that October 2025, there was a PLA Daily article essentially saying that the Chinese are looking beyond close quarter combat and moving beyond visual range capabilities for their main battle tanks. And your paper also says this is more akin to artillery than the traditional, conventional, old-style main battle tanks. So also the adversary is adapting, maybe we should, right? I mean, sort of answering Joe's question there as well. But also, Satya, I think we have spoken quite a bit about these alternatives, right? What are these alternatives that might potentially be able to substitute or even complement some of the functions that today main battle tanks do? And gentlemen, I'll request you to keep your answers brief so that we can cover more and also hear comments, because we have quite a bit of comments from our audience as well. So I'd like some time to get to that.
Right. Instead of just listing out all the possible alternatives, I'll just say, I agree with Vikrant when he says that network combined arms are going to be the future. Right. So, and the article I shared on the chat is probably summarizes at best. Is that rather than tank centric or masked armor centric, I think that's more accurate to say. The future lies in sensor, shooter meshes. You have UCAVs, ground-based ISR, artillery, mobile fire support vehicles, and platforms. You can have NBTs, but there are negatives to that. Or you can have light tanks, or you have infantry fighting vehicles, or you have things like strikers, right? And they'll all operate as integrated kill chains. And this is what the PLAs, let's say the combined arms brigades, also reflect. They're moving towards that front. And besides the fact that Germany and a lot of European countries are also replacing their main battle tank fleets with next generations of their main battle tanks, the Leopard and all, they're also moving towards this doctrinal concept, right? It's maybe not as refined. So when you look at this, maybe the alternatives that can do what most of what MBTs do in a particular field, right? Firepower, mobility, protection, maybe that can be done in a more economically feasible manufacturing, something that can be sustained by manufacturing in a country like ours, and with, let's say, being able to sustain massive attrition as well if there is a sustained conflict. So I think light tanks by far are the best alternatives. And in the paper, we also make a comparison across the tables. Of course, light tanks can achieve some of the things that main battle tanks do, which is the psychological effect, for instance, but they can operate in thin air and high altitudes, right? You have loitering munition batteries and long-range precision fires. But yeah, I'll just restrict that to that front. I would say light tanks, for instance, are a step in the right direction. Not to say that MBTs, so basically instead of 4,000 MBTs being replaced by another 4,000 MBTs, why don't you think of it in the 1,500 MBTs and 3,000 other platforms complementing it? Obviously, and you mix and match the objective being achieved, right? I think, yeah, that's basically a contention here.
Yeah, thanks, Satya.
Yeah, so even this,
just a sec, please. Just a sec. In the interest of time, I will move on to Amit, and you can respond to both their points together. I hope that works, just in the interest of time, please. Amit, I want to ask you about the cost involved here, right? Because we have a lot of conversation about how we just do not have sufficient defense budgets. And obviously, main battle tanks are not cheap, to say the least. And in your paper, you've actually done quite a comprehensive work on per unit cost of what these FRCVs might be, right? Where 57,000 crore spread across 1770 tanks amounts to 32 crore per tank, but you then compare with previous acquisition of the Arjun tanks, the T90 and multiple others, and essentially you say that this 32 crore is going to be a gross underestimate, that by the time the 3 phases of this procurement is over, the costs are only going to go up, and hence, before committing to something like this, we must evaluate this a little more seriously, because there's also, like you mentioned, the political economy here, right? Once you commit to something, you're sort of locked into it, and then it's difficult to pull out. So some analysis on not just the acquisition cost, but also the life cycle cost, because both are important. And the acquisition cost itself, like I just pointed out, might be very high, but also the maintenance, the upgradation, all of that, especially for these, because they are supposed to be enhanced main battle tanks, sort of getting over all the challenges that we just discussed so far. So can you throw some light on that? And Vikrant, will come to you after this.
Yeah, very briefly, just to make one point to the question that you posed to Satya. When we talk of substitutes and alternatives, what we need to think is, are there platforms that can unilaterally or in unison replace these tasks of MBTs? Now, the job of MBTs is to provide protected mobile firepower, right? And the critical question is that are there existing or emerging platforms that can perform these functions effectively, whether unilaterally or unison? And that, if you have an answer to that, I think with the current alternatives that we have in unison, I wouldn't say there will be one platform that could replace it, but if you look at various platforms that you have available and are going to be a part of your land warfare capabilities, I think that makes most of what MBTs do redundant. Now, coming on to the question of economics, how costly are they becoming? So because of these mounting threats that we have talked about, and the vulnerability, the problem is that we are basing the continued relevance of MBTs on future promises. We are reluctant to see what their state is in current battlefield and how they are performing the current battlefield. But the entire justification for this clinging on to having a large armored size troop is based on future promises that in future this will happen, in future this will happen. Now let's just take a look at the cost, right? So that you talk about the FRCVs. Now, the proposal says that they'll induct 1770 future-ready combat vehicles, and these are supposed to be next generation MBTs, which I have no problems with. I mean, as I said initially, that about 1,000 MBTs is what you should aim for going forward, right? But if you look at the costs over the years, if you just look at Arjun Mark 1, which was the first, I think, the first induction, the first round of induction came in 2002, and that was inducted at the cost of 17 crores Indian rupees. And there was supposed to be 124 Arjun Mark 1 tanks that was supposed to be inducted. And by the time the last Arjun was inducted, the cost had ballooned to 45 crores. Now, T90s, all variations of T90s that we have had since 2001 to 2014 and 2019, their costs have risen from 11 crores to about 43 crores. And the recent calculations tell you that the Arjun Mark 1A that is currently under still being inducted into the army, and still there are trials that are going on, or they have turnover, but I don't think the entire 118 Arjun Mark 1A tanks have been inducted completely. Their costs have ballooned to about 60 to 70 crores. And this is exclusive of the ERA or APS systems and that we talk about, and which, by the way, themselves have not been very effective in the current war that we keep referencing to, the Russia, Ukraine, etc. We would the idea is that we would require much more layers of protection to make this feasible, right? In this light, if you look at the unit cost of FRCV that was floated last year, this comes out to be about 32 crores, which is a joke, which is a serious underestimation, and this will escalate the cost to at least 150 crores per vehicle. If you add if you take account that Arjun at this point is about 70 crores, right? And if you without EPA and APS, ERA and APS, and as you go forward and keep adding new layers of protection, and if you look at the definition of FCRVs, they're supposed to act as a radar. They're supposed, like, if you look at the definition that the PIV has put out, they're supposed to act like a radar. So my another contention is, if MBTs are supposed to behave like DVR platforms and radars, do you feel your radars in front line, or do you keep them back behind defenses, right? So if they are supposed to work like that and have beyond visual range capabilities and work like radars, it doesn't make sense. My only point is that, I mean, the nomenclature and the classification, what you call them, and the political economy makes it difficult to make it impossible for us to say that India should look beyond main battle tanks. But I mean, retain the nomenclature, whatever, but the next generation tanks or whatever platform that it has to emerge into has to adapt to these conditions. Uske baad you call it MBT or whatever, that doesn't matter. But if it's doing all these things, that is what the larger argument of the paper also is, that in its current format, what MBTs are used to, or they're used to deliver, or they used to deliver in the past, those are no longer, I think, I mean, the possibility is very high that they'll no longer be able to contribute in the manner that they used to. Although there's still, I wouldn't say, I would like to retain that range of error in my assessment. And for that, what we have largely argued is that you can have a 1,000 MBT fleet while also focusing on other platforms like light tanks and IFVs or APAs, etc. that Satya talked about.
Amit, just in terms of the numbers quoted, Joe asks, are the costs corrected to inflation over the years of production and induction? Also, how would the replacement options like light tanks fare cost-wise?
No, these are nominal cost, not adjusted to inflation, but they are still
massive.
cost. The army does, the government doesn't put out inflation cost adjustment, but I think still, if you compare it with other platforms that are available, howitzer or a light artillery would cost you about 15 to 30 crores with modifications, depending on what modifications you require. But this is what you'll get. And I think like artillery in light artillery, towed artillery, and when I say artillery, I also mean rocket forces. Look at now the Pakistan has announced a rocket force in their that is supposed to be their main focus now going forward. And we have already looked at what the Chinese are talking about. BVR, they have mentioned very clearly that going forward, close quarter combats are going to be very, very difficult, and we are going to be our future tanks would be BVR range, BVR tanks. So yeah, so I lost the train of thought. The question that I was answering. What is that?
No, more about the cost of the alternatives, which you answered, I think.
Yeah.
Vikrant, very briefly, a response to Amit, and then we'll open up a lot of hands up, a lot of comments. I want to give enough time for that.
Yeah, the cost argument, I think your doctrine should not be driven by systemic limitations of your project management issues, or I mean, if you're not able to deliver on China is delivering on similar projects in a particular manner, and if you're not able to deliver, so you don't doctor your doctrine to adjust for those shortcomings. Instead, the stakeholders up their game to meet the doctrinal requirements. So that's my take. So if budgetary constraints are there, like arriving at numbers, it can't be a good gut feeling number that okay, 1,770, let's do 1,000. These numbers have been arrived at based on certain calculations in what terrain, how many formations, how many units are you going to field of this, how many T-72 existing ones are getting obsolete in what time frame, and how the replacement is going to pan out over the cycle once it develops. So all these issues have been co-opted into arriving at a particular number. And when we say that, okay, other options, so let's list the other options. Howitzer can't replace a tank for sure. K9 Vajra is an artillery gun. It's supposed to be, if it's a self-propelled artillery, it's going to operate in support of a mech formation, but it can't become a tank. So I understand there are platforms which are being developed, which have their own place in the whole orchestration of this force. So it can't be one or the other. You have to optimize it. And as their efficiency increases, the numbers can obviously go down. If, with AI, suppose a tank becomes so efficient that, its kill ratios are much better, its dependence on line of sight engagements is reduced. And I mean, those are ifs and buts, but finally, it will be a mix of all of this that will deliver on the battlefield. It will not be one particular, okay, so we like K9, so K9 should become the lead arm. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, thanks, Vikrant. I just also want to point out that when Amit and Satya talk about costs, it's not necessarily just the financial cost, which is huge and which they've pointed to. It's also the opportunity cost as to where this money could have been invested in, right? Space ISR, cyber capabilities, drones, yes, all of that. And secondly, sorry, just a sec, Vikrant. And secondly, on the Arjun tank example that Amit pointed out to, it's also the fact that despite all of these iterations and increasing costs over the years, there have been reports that the performance has still not been matched up in desert terrains because, sand also gets, soft sand specifically, it also gets mixed into the engine and multiple other components. So it's not been the most effective. Just wanted to also point out that.
Yeah, so again, the point to that, because the paper says, because in trials you pointed out, so you're trying to optimize equipment for its best performance, but that doesn't mean it might in battlefield, it will still not perform with all that. But then you take other measures to ensure that adequate numbers are maintained when you go to battle. So that is what is this whole thing. There's an entire repair and recovery, maintenance, and all those issues are cranked into the whole thing. So if say we go ahead with this project of replacing T-72 with even ICVs, there would be costs involved. If you think it is cheaper and you want to make that, but it has to be in coherence with the threats that are there, existing and futuristic, which are going to be all of these. The tanks will also be there. The adversaries will feed everything other than tanks as well. So my point is, if you're getting a very nuanced advantage out of taking a platform out of this whole thing, then do it by all means, but then it will come at its own cost.
Got it. Amit, do you want to respond very quickly to that? Okay, all good. Okay, so the question remains, are these really expensive vulnerabilities that we should be investing into, right? So I think on that, we will move to questions, and there are quite a bit of them. So for example, there is this question that asks, and this is Vikas Sharma. Can I come to you quickly? You say in a one-to-one fight, a medium tank will anyway beat a light tank. So tanks are for a specific role.
Yeah, so this is Vikas here. So the point is, I think we are not getting the context in which light tanks appeared on our scenario. Because if you get a light tank in the plains or the deserts and put it against a medium or a heavy tank, it cannot even stand for a very small amount of time. The context or the of a light tank in the high altitude areas is when it has to move across passes, across various bottlenecks and bridges. The bridge classifications are important. So that is where it becomes very, very important, and it can move very quickly to certain areas and be held as central reserves. And very quickly, like it was mentioned that the lessons of Russia-Ukraine war may not be applicable to India. Yes, it may not be applicable in the same context, but suitably modified, those lessons are very important. Like when the cavalry, machine gun appeared, cavalry could not stand, and it evolved into the mechanized forces of today. So when with these drones coming in, a time will come when mechanized forces will evolve into something else, probably what we cannot even think of today. But today it has been proved worldwide, the Russia-Ukraine war, beyond the Kyiv offensive, that for the built-up areas and capture of built-up areas, and herein what I think Satya and Amit were talking about, the close quarter battle, tanks and mechanized forces were very effective. Talking about artillery, I'm a gunner, so I can say that artillery cannot replace the tanks, because tanks provide observed and very, very accurate firepower. Artillery firepower, despite whatever you may say, precision artillery, is not so precise. It is held from a distance. So it is the integrated application of forces that is important. And very, very quickly, the last point, today when we're talking about tanks, we are already talking about putting on counter UAV systems on mechanized platforms at the troop level, or probably at the level of squadrons. That is still being debated. We are talking about having air defense system which can take on UAVs and drones and all these things, also now integrated with mechanized forces. We already talking about EW platforms which can jam not only the ground forces but also aerial forces. So I think it is very, very highly premature today to talk about whether MBT, because MBT is essentially a tank, is obsolete or not obsolete. A time will come when it will be obsolete. That time is not today. Thank you.
Anyone wants to respond to that?
I think I agree with most of what Vikas said as well. Like, and the evolution of tanks is what we're talking about. Where besides the terminology which we use, which is like looking beyond main battle tanks, the actual paper is just about reassessing the value of main battle tanks. And if you look at the table of comparison I've done in the paper, the MBT actually scores very well in a lot of areas. It's just that when we cannot afford to ignore the economic, technological, and manufacturing related constraints that we have when thinking about expansion in the future. We're not talking about doing away with MBTs at all. Like we're talking about, hey, 10 years down the line, when India has to take a call about replacing its 4,000 strong MBTs, should it not also consider a union of other platforms that can also achieve, let's say, 90% of what MBTs do, and therefore at a lower cost, and therefore can we afford to like lower the number of MBTs we have in fleet while we build up the fleets of these other platforms? That is pretty much it. And that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about MBTs being obsolete at all here.
Yeah, also just to add, nowhere did we say that artillery are going to replace MBTs. The question that we raised and the answer to which was yes, was can several platforms, either unilaterally or unison, can replace tanks? And the answer to that is yes, at a much lesser cost. And yes, and again, as Satya said, not doing away with MBTs completely.
All right. CDS Aswal. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I've seen your hand up for a while now. Please.
Yes. Very true. Firstly, I want to make a couple of points. Firstly, the era of tank battles, what I have learned from the Second World War, the nuclear threshold is a key factor for employment of armored formations. And that is going to cost the armored people. Secondly, is the cost factor, because MBT and a light tank is almost half the cost, life cycle cost. Every equipment has got a life cycle cost. So that is the second point. The third point is the terrain and the combat threat which we have today. The combat threat, maybe 30 years or 40 years or 50 years back, was somewhere else. Now it is somewhere else. The directions are well known to the military hierarchy. So if you want to lift a MBT and if you want to lift a light tank, the logistic costs, the maintenance cost, and the employability factors, they outbalance each other. Shock and off, fully agreed. MBT has got lot of shock and off, but I think with 50% of shock and off, also the deployment or employability can be considered. And the theater arms concept, it will always remain, because tank cannot fight alone, whether it is MBT or a light battle tank. Nobody can fight alone in the military hierarchy, starting from a single soldier to a single tank, whether it is light or heavy. So these are the five things I just wanted to emphasize. But I fully agree that if we are looking at other capabilities to fight another adversary, then we have to probably, uh, get on to this light battle tank concept, but also retain the capability. There is a deterrence capability, and there is a offensive capability. So both of them have to be retained. We have to find a balance out of it. Both of them have got the advantage. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to announce that the same poll, slightly reworded, has been put up again. Again, these responses are anonymous. The idea is to get a sense of the room and to see if this conversation provoked any thoughts in you. Having said that, Amit, Satya, Vikrant, do you want to respond to us while? All right.
We can have others chime in, and we have spoken enough.
Yeah, sure. Abhishek?
Hi, I'm Abhishek. I'm an infantry officer and I'm doing my research right now. I'm a research fellow with Maharashtra Institute of Technology in Pune, and I'm researching the Russia-Ukraine war, and I've spent enough time on studying what is happening there and especially what is happening to the tanks. And what I would like to contribute is I'm against the motion that has been put up by Satya and Amit. I'll tell you why. Because why did this debate start in the first place? This debate has started because the tanks have taken a tremendous amount of attrition in this war. Correct. In this war, the drones, particularly the FPV drones initially, and now the fiber optic drones, have caused a tremendous amount of damage. They have pushed the armor back. And as we speak today, there are no armor assaults, and the armor is being used in indirect fire role like the Vajras. But that being said, agreed. Now, the issue is, of course, a $500 drone is taking out $1 million tank. The cost factor also understood, whatever you guys are saying, is a very valid point. But the reality is the tank has been here for quite some time, and there is a reason, because it's a very adaptable, very versatile, and a very resilient platform. And there is no two ways about it, gentlemen. It is the most dominant force on a battlefield. I'm an infantry officer. I'm not an armored officer. I'm telling you, it's a very dominant and a very powerful platform presence on the battlefield. Right now, the drones have pushed it back. Fair enough. What I'm trying to come out to is the tank is simply one innovation away from getting back to its pole position. The US, one of the US company had just tested about a couple of weeks back a Leonidas system, which is a high-powered microwave radar, which emits and takes out drones within a second. It has taken out a drone of 40 swarm, swarm of 40 drones. You club this capability and it will happen. It's a cat and mouse game happening, and we will come there wherein you will have tanks with these microwave high power radars on top, which will not allow the drones to come close. And lo and behold, the tank will again come back into its pole position. So, like the others, Vikrant has said and Mr. Vikas has said, it is too premature to rule out the tank at this stage. The cat and mouse is still going on. And I'm just telling you, just Google it, Leonidas, HPM, and you'll realize what I'm saying. The tank will come back in the center. There is no answer to it. What is missing? The effort is excellent. I've also gone through the paper. But what is, I think, which is holding back the paper is a basic understanding of military operations and the role played by the MBT in it. It's not in isolation, what Vikrant was also saying. It clubs with other systems. Our land warfare doctrine, I must correct you, is not armored centric. It focuses on integrated battle groups. That is what our doctrine says. It doesn't say that armor will lead it. So the armor is never intended to be applied in isolation. It is supposed to function as part of integrated battle groups. Today, yes, the armor is back. Tomorrow, if we go to war, we'll have to be careful because the drones are making it difficult for that equipment to come up front. But just hold on. Don't rule it out right now. One innovation and this thing will come back. It takes decades and crores to build up a force of the mechanized formations to immediately start saying, I know you said 10, 20 years, fair enough, but to start assessing, now we phase it out. It's too premature. It will take a lot of effort to bring it back. Just one innovation. That's it. Thank you.
Vikas, point noted. I have relaunched the poll with exactly the same wording as we did in the initial one. Thank you. Vipul? Are you here? Can you hear us? Otherwise, maybe Joe? Amit, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sumesh,
Yeah,
are you here?
am I audible?
Yes, please, go on.
Joe here.
Go on, please, yes.
Yeah. Just a couple of points. My points are, first, a disclaimer that I have not read the paper. Second is that my points are predominantly biased towards a Western adversary. Third is that while we talk about the nuclear threshold, we are far from a nuclear threshold when it comes to comparable forces that we have and our Western adversary has. So let's focus predominantly on the conventional warfare where there is still a lot of scope. And MBTs do play an important role in conventional warfare. A number of speakers have alluded to that, both in offensive, of course, the swiftness with which it can reach an objective, and in defensive, the swiftness with which it can react to a offensive that is thrown at you. Now, the issue is that I was surprised that in this whole discussion, when we are discussing about the vulnerability of tank from the air, from a new platform that is drones, we have kind of missed out a discussion on air defense. Any mechanized force is extremely vulnerable without a self-propelled air defense component. For example, if you take out the self-propelled air defense component, an Apache attack helicopter or a Hugh Cobra attack helicopter can have a field day against mech forces. So when we talk about the vulnerability of the tank, predominantly from drones, instead of focusing all our effort, attention on the tank per se as a platform and trying to make it capable of firing against an adversary on the ground, on the air, do EW, do detection and all those things, we have to focus on improving our air defense capability that is associated with a combat group and a combat command and the entire battle group per se. So the role which an MBT does, today we do not have a replacement. So might as well let them do that role and look at other options which can protect them of their vulnerabilities which are not from their main role. So that was my point. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Sumesh? Sorry,
Sure.
just a sec. Satya, did you have something to respond to that?
Yeah, so I fully agree with that. And while the paper doesn't go into detail on the air defense side of things, and also like touching upon Vikas's point, we have mentioned that in the paper is that, hey, without these aspects, armored forces are going to be at the wherewithal of, at the mercy of basically attack helicopters and other platforms. The point is that, as Vikas also mentioned, these are also things that will keep adding to the cost factor and the complexity factor and the supply chain factor. And if all these factors continue to apply to other platforms as well, and as well as main battle tanks, is it cheaper? Is it maybe more effective in network combined arms to focus on these platforms as well instead of only main battle tanks to achieve that objective, right? And that is the extent of the argument. It's not saying MBTs are obsolete, or like we're not focusing on only the attrition that we see in the Ukraine war, and saying that okay, MBTs are obsolete. We're saying that, hey, look at these alternatives now, and when you replace this, can you just reassess this? Even if you decide to go with MBTs later, you will get a good idea of what can be discharged by other platforms, what role can be discharged, what can be effectively enhanced, augmented down the line, right? It's not even advocating for doing away with MBTs. So yeah, so that's the point. Sorry.
All right. Somesh?
Yeah, thanks. I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay. So firstly, I'm totally amateur to this subject, but thank you, Satya Amit, for presenting this, and also very much thank you to Vikrant for giving a rebuttal. This indeed was very insightful for a person who is not aware with the whole concept of what main battle tanks are. Or again, a disclaimer: I haven't read your paper, but the 4 points that I would like to, contribute from my side were, again, as a layman, I have not participated in any war or not. I don't serve any position, but all video footages or all footages of war that we see or are portrayed in movies start with roaring and bustling tanks that cover the ground and sweep into enemy territory. Now, the point that Vikrant had made, wherein, say, either for our strategic purposes or for defenses, the day arrives when artillery fails or other mechanisms fail and enemy goes in with their tanks. What do we do if the number that has been decided by the armed forces, whatever the number 4,000 is, and if we lack in that sense, do we have alternatives that will equally replace that? Will it, now in that terms, the second point, provide a deterrence to those incursions, or will it serve our strategic purpose on the contrary? Second, again, point, referring to Vikrant's point, I really was agreeing with him on part of whether saying that, okay, Pakistan has declared that it will now go for a rocket force. It can even go for a constellation force. But are we to fall prey to that and give up our age-old deterrence if the army or the Indian government believes that these MBTs provide deterrence, strong deterrence? We can, again, to supplement this point, I can say that we can look for supplementing it with something else. But if we are making an argument that we are to move beyond this and to scrape out something from this 4,000 number or this budget, whatever that will be allocated to it, we should have a very strong argument that whatever formation we have currently won't be useful or won't serve any deterrence. For arguing that there is supplementary mechanisms or supplementary tools necessary, we can put forth the paper's objective. But if it is absolutely to carve out something from the existing number, we must have a very strong argument. And lastly, I would like to ask Satya and Amit that I heard a lot of times the number of 1,000 is enough or X, whatever X number is enough. Do we have a strong rationale behind arriving at that number? Because if the armed forces has pinned down on a particular number, if we are to counter it with some other number, we should have a very strong argument. So do we have that?
Yeah, thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Yeah, it's also already almost exactly a minute from 8:30. Thank you all for joining. Yes.
Just get Satya the last word.
Yeah. I'm just talking about, like, just a clarification. When I mentioned the numbers here, that was like indicate the train of thought we're talking about. We haven't mentioned, hey, like scrape 1,000 T-72s and replace that with like 1,500 Zorawars, right? That's not the point here. And the point here is, when you are reassessing replacement or expansion, think about it. And from what I can see, that is at this point of time, there's mostly just a blame game between the MOD and organizations like DRDO, and not so much with a view to proactively think about platforms like this. That's all from my end. Okay, bye guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Vikrant, I see your hand up. And folks, we are dot at 8:30, so if you want to drop off, feel free to. Although it would be a favor to us if you could fill the poll before you do that, just so we get the sense of the room. Vikrant, over to you, and maybe we can close with both yours and Amit's final thoughts.
Yeah, I think it was a good discussion. In fact, I just raised my hand to thank you for moderating it for us. And it's been a good discussion. And my take on this numbers thing, which Satya just mentioned, I mean, it is too much of a presumption to think that it's a number arrived at without any thought or thoughtlessly. So there must have been adequate number of iterations that would have gone through to each, because you can see it's an odd number. And so if it's been projected, then it's gone through multiple iterations. It's been justified in that sense. And that's why it's reached there. And if it has to change, like Abhishek said, it's either there's some capability which will come in, which will kind of offset the numbers and let lesser numbers deliver equal effects, or more numbers would be required. So it's all a game of how the threat evolves and how it's countered.
Amit?
See, my only issue is that, again, we are basing all the justifications on future promises, and reluctant to see what the ground reality is at the current moment. And yes, you'll have something in the future that can make MBTs less vulnerable, I would say. But again, look at where the cost is going. You are adding it's a platform for which you are investing a lot of money to increase its survivability rather than lethality. So that's a problem, and it's a conundrum that I have. But yeah, I've spoken enough. Somesh, your question, is it okay that if you post your question on OT and maybe Satya or I can respond to it? I'm sorry we could not take the question. We are over time. But yeah, over to you, Somesh. Thanks a lot for moderating this session.
Yeah. Somesh, we're referring to the Open Takshashila platform. In the comments, you can leave your question and one of us will respond to you. I mean, not me, obviously. Amit, Satya, or Vikrant would respond to you. Thanks, everyone. With that, we can end the session. Thank you so much for doing this, Amit. Satya isn't here. Vikrant, thank you so much.